Ladies and gentlemen, here is the book I'll be reading from today. It's called Bliss in Triple Rhythm, a toolbox for poets. Now, why so much bliss in triple rhythm? I should try to explain that for starters. Generally speaking, the most of the poetry that's been written in regular rhythms that you may have heard is in two-syllable rhythms, like this. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. He does that 5 times over, Shakespeare does. And 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. La 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 la. And a la la is an iamb, and it's got 2 parts, la and la. Now, suppose that's nice. That is a perfectly fine way to do things, and Shakespeare got a lot of mileage out of it, no doubt, but it isn't the only thing you can do. Suppose we went in for 3s. La 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 la, and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4, and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4, and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4. That sounds like fun. Let's try it. That was a poem in amphibrax. La la la. No, wait a minute. La la la. La la la. That's an amphibrac. And here's a poem that I have written with real words in it to go with that rhythm. It's called Hail, Holy Light. Those are the first 3 words of Milton's invocation of light in Book 3 of Paradise Lost. You don't need to know that, but it's kind of interesting because Milton glorifies the sun in the sky, lighting up the world, and then he compares that with his eyes, which light up nothing because he's blind while writing the poem. Absolutely, totally blind. He composes all night and dictates to his daughters when they come down in the morning for breakfast. So that's just a background thought. Okay, now we'll start with the poem. Is time in control or am I? There's a question. Let deity picturing lend a suggestion. See light of the morning Apollo appear. He's mastered the craft of the charioteer. You're also a reiner, a trainer, a rider of sun-flaring steeds, the director, provider, the bliss of the bridegroom you know, and the force you feel in the spirit is leading each horse. How quick is a minute of living? Determine. By verve are you spurred in the word of your sermon. Your anthem is graphing your transit in time, deep breathing in vigor with canorous rhyme. Don't model your travel on Saturn, old Cronus. Divest yourself well of dead memory onus. Hail future in aureate helial spree, and carry to Phoebus a greeting from me. La 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 la, yes, amphibrac. Lots of fun, huh? That's a good starter for 3s, but there are other kinds of triple meters. You could do not la la la, amphibrachian meter, but you could do la la la. And then we're in anapest territory. I have a poem of that sort for you. It's called Hippo. I took an antiquarian tour of Egypt, and one of my fellow tourists bought me a clay hippo because I told of the whole group of my deep liking for that Egyptian blue, very special color. Have you seen it? It's wonderful. And the whole hippo was blue and covered all over with lotus markings. Now, hippos often manage to have a somewhat pregnant look about them, and the lotus is an additional symbol of fertility. And so I thought, this is an excellent emblem of productivity for which I'm always aiming. An Egyptian, la la la, an Egyptian clay hippo I lovingly view with her multiple lotus tattoo. Every stage in the growth of the plant may be seen for a hippo-like symbol serene. It is glazed in the vivid and sumptuous hue of a sky rich in brightness of blue. Who the riddle of hippo and lotus can know, may enriched by fertility grow. Stems a wave in the wind and new budded in spring, him the blessing that pregnancies bring. And it happened that on the computer today, blissful hippos were floating my way. To the emblems attend, let fecundity come by the Nile, hear a thunderbolt drum. Be the eye of Osiris amenable to productivity season for you. There's something about triple meters that speeds up my heart and generally jollifies my mood. Now here, this could slow down the tempo a little bit, because the third trisyllable foot or structure unit that I'd like to demonstrate and illustrate for you is the dactyl, and they're written often in longer lines like this: la la la. Okay, so we had la la la, then we progress to la la la, and amphibrach to anapest to dactyl. Dactyl is la la la. And these are often written in 6-beat lines for a relaxed, conversational, chatty feel. And what's more, they're written in couplets. And the second line in each of these couplets has a pause in the middle for just an interesting variant in the form. In other words, 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 5 and a 6 and 1 and a 2 and a 3, 4 and a 5 and a 6. This was used for hundreds of years and then not used anymore. And that's all of these triple meter tempos. This bliss in triple rhythm is not available in contemporary Anglo poetry because people aren't using it. I don't have a single friend who writes in this meter, just nobody. In fact, you want to know something? I'm not acquainted with a person on planet Earth, unless I look in the mirror, who will write in this meter, and yet is just wonderful for every kind of chatty conversation. Being two people at once may lend energy perfect requital. Being two people at once may lend energy perfect requital. Selfhood is boring, and yet self, when divided in two, offers a colloquy. Shared, the perspectives of both are more vital. Love you will give and will win, double advantage for you. Reading the scripture within him, Muhammad, in triumph recital, teacher and learner combined, showed us each one what to do. Two are the ways that the doubling is done. In a mind conversation, A had suggested to B, both of them dwell in my brain, how about proofreading 25 lyrics and blogs? A summation, then you may, confident, write. This will the preface contain. Work through the night and they're finished, okay? B replied with elation. Sure, let's get busy. No prob. Pleasure with maximal gain. Dialogue, then, for good planning's a help. But your psyche division also at times will occur quite independent of plan. Being transported, translated, in ecstasy means that a scission comes. You are split. You are two, truly beside yourself. Man, that's what the Greeks called ecstatic, a standing apart. What precision! How to attain such a bliss? Here's how the rhapsodist can. After completing a hymn that is bursting with lyrical feeling, do something else for a while. Later, returning, you'll see something occur that may stun you and leave you quite weak-kneed and reeling. How could this marvel have been written by someone like me? Prostrate yourself to the gods, who their love for you blessed are revealing. Rise and with fireword go forth, people by heart warmth to free. I've got to make a confession here. The last line is in italics. Rise and with fireword go forth, people by heart warmth to free. That's a loose translation of the conclusion of Pushkin's poem, Prophet. I'm becoming a regular prophet by the end of this presentation. He writes, «Встань, пророк, и виждь, и внемли, исполнись волею моей, и, обходя моря и земли, глаголом жги сердца людей». I thought you'd like to hear maybe a little bit of Russian. I read Russian poems all the time. I love them. I majored in it. I took a master's in it. I can't stop loving it. Well, so that ends our first unit on the simple uses of three-syllable meter. Nothing complicated about it. Each of them has its own accent and in all three in a different place. It's easy to keep them distinct and clear, and they're very easy to use. Well, I don't know. They're easy for me because I've written a few thousand of each. But anything gets easier the more you practice it, and I do love to practice it. Now, we're going into the next section, which reveals some of the brilliance of the ancient people. These poems, that I show you now, are in forms that really are extinct. Absolutely nobody writes in them. In Russia, they still write in the amphibrach. I have seen them write in the anapest. And I'm not sure about the dactyl, but the amphibrach and the anapest for sure. Sometimes it pays to go to a different country. Germans also have a liking to some extent for triple meter. So I am a traveler in space and in time for unusual rhythms in word song. I've given you something that you could find out, that you could discover for yourself if you're a traveler and you go to a different country and you look at their poetic practice. You might find one of those forms, but you're not likely to find any of the things that I'm going to show you now, because generally speaking, they've been either extinct or on the verge of it for the last 2,000 years. And I don't know why that should have happened, because I think the discoveries are brilliant. Here, for example, is the third Asclepiadic, as the Greeks called it, in honor of Asclepius, who was a kind of deified doctor. He's the god that heals you. If you go to a hospital in ancient Greece or Rome, I went to the ruins of these that survive, you would be at a place sponsored by Asclepius, the god of healing. You would take some wine, you would sleep, you would get to handle snakes. That is very therapeutic. That was what was thought in ancient times, and I am not entitled to say what present-day opinion is on this matter. And then you would sleep, and it's possible, under the right circumstances, with some soothing voices in the background, that you might see the great doctor god in a vision, and he might present you with a cure. That would be very nice. If that works out, what you can do afterward is send a votive token to the hospital. There are tons of these that survive. In other words, what you do is you make a clay model of the organ that was cured. No organs are left out of the possible gifts that could be sent. You make a facsimile in clay or any material you like. You could carve it in wood of the organ that was cured, and you can gild it or paint it in bright color or put it on a plaque that's maybe painted a different color. I like to think about this. Okay, so this is named in honor of Asclepius, the god of healing. I'm not quite sure why. And let's see what the rhythm is. 1 and 2 and a 3, 4 and a 5 and 6, 1 and 2 and a 3, 4 and a 5 and 6, 1 and 2 and a 3 and, 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4. Can you imagine talking like that? I'm about to start, and every stanza will have to be like that. And people used to write this way. I find it so ingenious. There's nothing as complicated as that in the regular meters that are used at the present day. Not a whole lot of people are even using regular meters at the present day, but those that do won't ever try this, and what they try won't be as complicated. It's really, and yet once you get into the swing of it, I think you'll really enjoy it. I'll go through it again. 1 and 2 and a 3, 4 and a 5 and 6. 1 and 2 and a 3, 4 and a 5 and 6. 1 and 2 and a 3 and 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4. And you notice it's Bliss in triple rhythm, even though the threes, the novelty here is that the threes are combined with twos, and always in the same way in the corresponding line of every stanza. Praise the gift of the hymn found ere the seeker try. Laud the visitant vim granted to lifted hands, making stronger the weaker, raising songful the soul from bands. Thank the chill for the brisk wind that we glad inhale. Green let's speak of the life dewy renewed in eye. We're the oil lamp Aladdin, rug on runway to climb the sky. Mars departed with March, comes Aphrodite near. Rhododactyl the hand, Henad the heaven rose. Passion grandeur the mighty, waked unslaken, the chanter chose. Do you like that for a word song? It's musical, yes? Don't know what else to say. It got me started. It got me really going. Some of the words are a little unfamiliar maybe. Rhododactyl, that just means rosy-fingered. I like it, and Homer liked it because it fills up in syllables. And these lines sometimes need just the right number of syllables and the accent in just the right place. That's why Dawn is always rosy-fingered in Homer. It fits the beat. He made choices often on that kind of ground. And Mars, you know, gives his name to the month March. But you may not be aware that Aphrodite, who follows, is the source of the name April. It doesn't sound, April and Aphrodite don't sound too much alike, but there was a version of the name in ancient Greece that was closer to April. I only discovered that last year. Now we proceed to the fourth Asclepiadic. It's just as good, only perhaps a little more complicated. Here's the beat. 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and a 3, 4 and a 5 and 6. 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and a 3, 4 and a 5 and 6. Got to use your brains for this, yes? And I have written a poem about Binghamton weather in this meter. Or, if you like, Vestal weather. Technically, I live in Vestal. Weather theater comes to us every day as a treat, natural moods to share. If the kitchen's electric lamp oddly wavers a bit, so does the lightning mild. Burke and Kant, the sublime described, pre-assumed as a place carefully guarded. Then, master-minded, we deem ourselves, who at tranquil remove calmly the storm observe. We a hortus conclusus need. Folk who dwell on the bank, facing a river flood, note their theater quite destroyed. Picturesque though the view long had remained, 'tis gone. I a house on a hill had bought, cozy, warm the retreat, best for a weather show. 20 years when I reached, my dad paid the rest of the cash, ending the mortgage due. Much relieved by his thoughtful act, not a moment I lost, rendering heartfelt thanks, answered he, in the graveyard I don't desire to be called wealthiest man that's here. Nice, huh? Everybody should have a father with this kind of psychology. 40 years old. He was shocked at how much I was paying to the bankers. I'd been paying for 5 years or so, and 90+% was still going into the pockets only of bankers. He was enraged by that. He was exasperated. He said, we'll do something about this. You can ask a question if you like at any time. I don't mind, because I have to take a breath now and then anyway. Anyway, we're about to begin. What? What comes after the fourth Asclepiadic? Well, the fifth. Let's have the fifth Asclepiadic. That is slightly less complicated in one way and a little more complicated in another. It's less complicated in that you don't have to remember, this is the rhythm for line 1, this is the rhythm for line 2, this for line 3, and this for line 4. This is what is called a stichic strophe. That is, a one-verse pattern guides everything. So you only have to learn one pattern in one line, and then you just do it. And what's the pattern? 1 and 2 and a 3, 4 and a 5, 6 and a 7 and 8. 1 and 2 and a 3, 4 and a 5, 6 and a 7 and 8, and that's all you're going to hear. But I think it's got jaunty. It's got it's like skipping. And what I've done is I translate during the first half of it, the first 2 stanzas, from an ode by Horace, which he wrote in this meter. This is Horace, Book 4, poem number 10. He calls his poems odes. Sometimes he just calls them songs. And then in the next 2 stanzas, I take over and I comment, and my comments are a little different from his. I use rhymes. I use complicated rhymes, rhymes of parts of lines in addition to rhymes of the totalities of lines, because I love rhymes. Why didn't Horace ever rhyme anything? Or maybe you didn't know this, but Horace never rhymed anything. Also, maybe this may also be new to you. Greeks and Romans never sought a poem in rhyme. You'll never find a rhymed poem. Occasionally, a couple of lines will rhyme, and they won't erase it. They'll keep it, but it's not something they especially appreciated. So, why didn't they rhyme, and why do we? We discovered it. It's modern. It's a modern discovery. Some people might think it's old-fashioned, but it surely is not. Not in the big scheme of things. So I don't see why, now that rhyme has been discovered, I shouldn't use it to the max. And in my reply, I do. And the result is that this poem is a bit of a hybrid. First, we have the Greco-Roman style of writing, rhymeless, and then we have me coming in and combining what I have to add as a person writing in 2019. Here's Horace then. Cruel weapons, I fear, Venus can wield, so you will soon find out. When the bloom on your cheek, feature of pride, fades unawaitedly, hair worn shoulder length now, floating in grace, then will have fallen down. All the roseate health, fainter in shade, feeling the years come on. Satin smooth will the dear face that we knew cede to a texture rough. Ligurianus you'll cry, then with regret, noting the mirror view. Would that feelings today might by a gift those of my youth return. Joys come back from the past, comforting glad, mood of delight restore. He's talking to this beautiful person. It happens to be a man, and saying, wait a few years, don't put too much stock in just what you see in the mirror right now. It's going to change, I have to tell you. And here's my reply. Some feel time in a stream, quieting dream, bearing the mind to sea. Others think it a storm, menace enorm, bidding the heart to fight. Some just call it a clock, fearing to balk, mild in the master's sight. Others, dim with dismay, brush it away, turn to eternity. Time's my lady of love, rhymes with above, under, surrounding too. Tidal rhapsody we, avid in spree, shape with a hallelujah. Meter speeding along, we with a song, hymn when the birds are gone. Teach the sun to believe, rhythmical heave, bodies the words of dawn. I'm celebrating all kinds of rhythms. Fifth Asclepiadic. Well, I take a minute of quiet pause, and then I proceed to what we have next, which is more relaxed and relaxing. In fact, it's a satire. It's a interesting self-directed satire. This is a form called the hendecasyllabic. Goes like this: 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4 and 5 and 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4 and 5 and. And that's all you need to know, because this is another of those Stickich strophes where pattern for one line is all you need and you just keep doing it. Now, there happens to have been a wonderful poet in ancient Rome who's hardly ever read nowadays. His name was Catullus, and he wrote in the latter part of the empire in hendecasyllabics. He made a career out of hendecasyllabics. The man wrote hundreds of them, and he converted me because he writes so well. And here's one where he's giving an invitation to his friend Fabellus, okay? And after I've given you his 3 stanzas, all of which are short, I'll give you my reply, a little comment. Dining well is a guarantee, Fabellus, when you come in the next few days, God willing, if you also will bring a nice big dinner, not forgetting a girlfriend who's attractive, nor the wine and the wit providing laughter. Charmer, keeping in mind these kindly favors, you're assured of a grand old time. The wallet, sad to say, of your friend is lined with cobwebs. In return for your gift, you'll savor friendship, maybe something more elegant and pleasant. I will give you an oil which to my girlfriend all the Cupids and Venuses had granted. Smelling this, you'll be tempted to request that into nothing but nose the gods may turn you. Here, the irony master, God be laureled, made a jest of a cordial invitation. Should you come and provide an entertainment, dinner, company, jokes, and fine imbibing, I'll repay you for splendid contributions. You'll a fragrance enjoy, for love essential. How to give an invitation when you haven't got any cash? That's the way he writes all the time, Catullus. He could be very 21st century. He could be in New York City complaining about how he's not getting any salary. He's, so to speak, long-term, temporarily unemployed. Okay, we can skip that. That's pretty clear, I think, what we've done. Now, Alcaic comes next. Alcaic astonishes me. Listen. And 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4 and 5 and 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4 and 5 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and a 2 and a 3 and 4 and. I think that's the most dramatic thing that the Greeks and Romans ever cooked up. And you got to do that in every stanza of your poem. That's a bit of a task, but it's a joy. And I used it for another lighthearted topic. In this case, I'm talking about Henry VIII, and I consider him as a composer. He wrote 32 musical compositions, and I have them all on a CD. And you can listen for an hour and a half to nothing but Henry VIII. Works that he wrote for instruments or for voice, and when he wrote for voice, he wrote the words, and when he wrote vocal songs to perform, he would perform them with the lute. A very musical guy. In fact, he was quite an astonishing composer. He could have had a full-time career in music had he not been distracted by other matters. Works 32 had Henry VIII composed, melodious tone that might by his life be glozed. Interpreted. In faith that merit love obtaineth, fate he bewails when the maid disdaineth. He'll many tunes devote to the claim of youth, to have its will in honor and cordial truth. If head and heart conflict, says Harry, pray to the Lord when you're forced to tarry. Strong lyric impulse here, when the solo sings, an obligato part will adorn the king's. She's ivy-like, in love entwining, flexible gesture, his own divining. This cortegiano, master of courtly love, says youth will rule, though bowing to powers above. A church he founded, morals foundered, music had flowered, if royals floundered. It's interesting to think of Henry VIII as the founder of a church, isn't it? But in fact, he is the spiritual leader who was responsible for founding the Anglican Church, the Church of England, which of course did not exist before he came along. You're well aware of that. He did do quite a lot besides compose. Now the next one. Oh yes, this is nice. This is a kind of relaxing meter. I've given you some very, very strange meters. This one is easy because it's got three rather simple short lines and they're all the same. And then comes an even shorter one, just to calm you down further. I find I like to write relaxing things. Often calming sentiments are expressed in my sapphics. This is a sapphic named in honor of Sappho. Have you heard of her? Yeah, she's the most famous woman poet in ancient Greece. And she may, in fact, be the oldest woman poet in the world that we can identify. The question is whether Miriam, you know, who sang a hymn after the crossing of the Red Sea, as it's called, actually the Sea of Reeds. After the Exodus, when the liberation had been attained, there was a celebration. And Miriam came out and she was playing some kind of a tambourine and she was singing, I suppose very beautifully and certainly triumphantly, her song of victory that she had composed. Franz Schubert has made a setting of it. I found it on the listed on Amazon, but I haven't been able to get a hold of it yet. He calls it Miriam's Siegesgesang, Miriam's song of victory. However, the thing is that the Bible doesn't say she wrote it. So it's possible that she just simply recited it. Therefore, the honor of earliest identifiable woman poet has to go to Sappho. She was so good, and she wrote, by the way, a ton of poetry. She wrote a great treasure trove of it. Less than a pamphlet now survives. Plato thought she was so good she ought to be called the 10th muse, the 10th of the goddesses that inspire the creative arts and in culture. Here's how a sapphic goes then. 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4 and 5 and 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4 and 5 and 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4 and 5 and 1 and a 2 and. You can see how that would be a nice calm kind of meter. I've used it to describe a piece of music I was listening to that had a similarly calming effect. It was by Dietrich Buxtehude. Buxtehude had a Danish name. He was of Danish ancestry. He was one of the organ teachers of J.S. Bach, and his cantatas are not very well known. In this cantata, actually, he wrote, it's a sequence of 7 short vocal pieces, and each one is devoted to part of the body of Jesus. And what you're supposed to do is picture that body part of Jesus while you listen to the cantata and imagine the suffering that it underwent during the crucifixion. And this should intensify your empathy and produce a state of spiritual depth and understanding, it is hoped. It's very unusual among Protestant composers to find this kind of writing. It's very much like what the Catholic Saint Ignatius prescribed for poetic practice in his spiritual exercises. But I was very much attracted to the music and interested in the concept too. And in order to illustrate the love of Jesus for humanity expressed through his willingness to suffer in this way, Buxtehude brings in another love poem, a very different one, the Song of Songs by Solomon, which you'd think, how do you bring those together? He's convinced that love is love, and all of it should be combined in a general praise of love. Buxtehude's passion, you well might call it. Membra Jesu Nostri, the rightful title. That means body parts of our Lord Jesus. Feet, knees, hands, side, chest, and the heart and face in 7 cantatas. Holy madrigals of the 1680s, each with prelude played by a viol consort, taught the grace of body imagination. Hearing, the human learns a Bible passage, the introduction, then relates the thought to a deed of mercy, dwelling on the empathy of the Savior, martyr and mortal. Ere the cloven side we in woe envision, Solomonic word in a song will charm us. Dove he calls to come from her hidden nest in rock hollow, wall crack. Ere to heart we turn for a clement refuge, you my heart have wounded, O spouse, O sister. In his hymn King Solomon, our companion, begs for compassion. Every kind of love we in love are given, let be shared, be sure they are brought together. Every body part, when I pray, is praying. Thanks, when I'm thankful. I've introduced another tradition here on top of the Jewish and the Christian. I introduced a Sufi tradition. Ibn Arabi, the medieval Sufi poet, says, anybody who prays conducts a congregation, because every organ, every cell, every atom of your body, and every thought and feeling and impulse of your mind are all praying. So you're the mullah and you lead the group. I'm going to have a glass of water. Thank you. I don't have any poems about frogs, such as may be in the throat on occasion. Nice, that's a relief. Well, Sappho, that's her most famous contribution, legendarily, to the history of literature, the Sapphic stanza, simple and relaxing. There is also, however, something called the Greater Sapphic, not meaning that it's better, but it has longer lines and longer poems were written in it. And there, the meter is 1 and a 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and a 4, 5 and a 6 and 7 and 1 and a 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4, 5 and a 6 and 7 and. I like it. I've written a number of them. But Horace only wrote one in his life, and he is the champion among Romans for loving all things Greek. He was a super Hellenophile, and he tried to make sure that all the Greek forms would be preserved in his personal poetic practice. But he only wrote one of these. Maybe he found it difficult. I cannot get inside the mind of Horace in great detail at this point. But I like the form, and I'm going to help it remain non-extinct by using it several times, now and in future. And what I've done here is simply translate his ode, his surviving Greater Sapphic ode, so we would see what attracted him to this meter, or what attracted him when he was singing in this meter. 8th of the odes of Horace, that's the only one in the rare form of the Greater Sapphic. I have an English version, found where now we finally learn what are the theme and treatment. Lydia needs reproaching. She allured young Sybaris, quite torn from his love for action. Swimming and soldier drilling, fighting, discus throwing are all willfully shunned, abandoned. He, though a splendid athlete, far withdrawn is hidden away, totally sybaritic, that is, a lazy loafer loving luxury. Think of Achilles hidden, fearing Trojan combat disguised, shame in a maiden's garment. Thanks to a shrewd unmasking, which the skilled Ulysses had planned, Greeks had a chance to triumph. Since, in the Trojan conflict, gods made clear Achilles would bring, crucial, the secret weapon. Lydia, kindly listen. Passion put aside, I entreat, those whom the gods would ruin, first they afflict with madness. Play no more the lyrical flute, sapping a manly valor. women can get in the way when you're preparing for battle. And these Greeks were always preparing for, or Romans were always preparing for battle, that's for sure. And in the last section of my book, I have a Bliss in triple rhythm, 2s combined with 3s, but in ways that I made up. It's a classical idea. Shakespeare never does it. It's an old idea, but you can apply it in your own way. So, for example, you can have, let's see, 1 and a 2 and 3, 1 and a 2 and 3 and 4, and 1 and 2 and 3, 1 and a 2 and 3 and 4. You see, you have la, 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 and also la, la, la in various combinations and put in different places. It's a bit free, but it isn't totally free. We have nothing but 2s and 3s, and we combine them as we like. And we also have stanzas which are rather constant, because it's 3 beat, 4 beat, 3 beat, 4 beat. So I've calculated carefully the amount, the number of variables allowed, as opposed to the constants which are preserved. And I'm using this unusual form to describe an unusual life, my grandmother's. I'm talking about my grandmother. And interestingly, and maybe a bit arbitrarily, I called the poem Passport, because it came to me as I was looking at her passport. I have her 1913 passport that she used to leave the Ukraine and come to Toronto, Canada. I don't have any Ellis Island stories for you. All of my family were originally Canadians, and most of them still are. 1913, the year. Grandma and children racked with fear. 11964. Left the Ukraine. We may deplore her fate at 35. How could she keep the kids alive when in Toronto she saw her poor husband horribly killed when he slid and fell off of his peddler horse? He died at work. Clothes peddler. They tell how she was left alone with little she might call her own. She's only in her early 30s with 4 kids to support. She had to marry soon. He was well off, a crucial boon. True, he was older, much, but he could buy a home and such. Tenants would rent, she'd cook. Her life took on another look. Though often she would shout, a temper, he would never pout. Patient, my cousins say, and merely looked the other way. He loved being a father of 4. He loved having such a wonderful wife. She was a great cook, I have to tell you. I didn't get to talk to her very much. She spoke the Yiddish language, which I did not comprehend, but she understood a few words of English, and I treasured those. I've got to finish the poem. I shouldn't go on like that. What comes next? Passover Eve. How he had startled been when suddenly she weakened. Hospital. Aged 104 and sorrowful, he hanged himself, and she recovered fully, speedily. She lived decades on after he killed himself at the age of 104. That's true love, isn't it? And he did it on Passover night, one of the holiest times of the year, and as if he was defying God and the entire created world. It was only my step-grandfather, but even so, I wasn't allowed to hear about it for 10 years after it happened. Because, you know, it's just like the Catholics in Judaism. Suicide is not approved. Well, you know what I did at the end of this book? I put on a little appendix at the end, which brought me back to the amphibrachs that I started with, and even to the Russians who set me the example for writing them. And I translated this poem called Mermaid by Mikhail Yuryevich Lermontov. He believed actually that his name wasn't Russian at all, Lermontov. He said it was a version of Learmont, which is a Scottish name, and he was a Scotsman. His ancestors should never have left Russia. He says in another one of his wonderful poems, he says, "Here I am surrounded by snow. I have nothing in common with Russian snow. I am the last scion of dauntless warriors, and I ought to be resting in, walking across the heather where my forefathers lie. And if I were a raven, I would go there, like that raven flying overhead. I would sweep the minstrel harp with my raven wing, and the sound would reverberate throughout the vaulted corridors." That's what I would do. But unfortunately, fate doesn't listen, and here I am, and nothing can possibly alleviate my miserable fate. But I didn't choose to read that for you. In fact, instead I picked mermaid. A mermaid. She glides on the moonlighted stream of the river, more bright than a dream. And the splash of her swimming, the sky-reaching spray, will reflect every silvery ray. Loud sounding and whirling, the current will stir all the cloud forms in mirroring whir. And as the mermaiden sings, craggy cliffs on the shore make the melody echo the more. The mermaid is singing, the water deeps hold, amid fast fleeting glimmering gold of daylight not gone, fish in numbers untold over cities of crystalline cold. And there, pillowed gently on sand, jewel bright, under shade of thick reeds of huge height, lies a warrior sleeping. The jealous waves pray, a lord from a land far away. We love to comb out in the calm of the night curls smoother than silk, and the sight of that brow and those lips, lovely, comely to kiss, oh, the blessing, the heavenly bliss. But to all of our loving, I cannot tell why, he so cold will decline to reply. Not a word, he is still. When he slept on my breast, not a whisper, no breath broke his rest. So murmurs the maid by the bright shining stream. Unappeasable sorrow would seem to bewilder the waves, while the currents bestir all the cloud forms in mirroring whir. Thank you.